hello, and welcome to the first ever Latinx Kidlit Book Festival, and specifically this panel, De Colores, a roundtable discussion with LGBTQ plus Latinx writers. Before we get started, just a couple of things I want to point out and refer y'all to the anti-harassment policy, and that you can find and read in the chat box. I would also ask that if you are going to speak of or to a specific author, that you please respect our pronouns. And yeah, that's that on that. So we're just going to go ahead and get started because I am extremely excited to be just virtually among some amazing icons, legends, and stars, and to get this conversation going. So we'll start with introductions. I'll go first, and we can just kind of like clockwise fashion this. So yeah, I'm Jonny Garza Villa. I am the moderator and young adult author of the upcoming debut novel, 1,500 Miles from the Sun, about Corpus Christi, Texas teenager Jules Luna, who accidentally comes out as gay on Twitter after getting exceptionally drunk at a party. And in the days and weeks and months that follow, Jules gets to realize all the happiness and joy and love that can happen when we allow ourselves to be who we are, while also discovering the pain and rejection that can very much be a part of choosing to live out our truth. And that comes out June 8th, 2021. So yeah, Tehlor?
Okay, thank you, because I couldn't remember which way clockwise was for a second. And also, I just want to say that I really want to read that book. It sounds...
I will just let me know, Tehlor. Oh my God.
Like, please send me one. I would love that so much. Hi, I'm Tehlor Kay Mejia, and I don't know which way clockwise is. I am also the author of several young adult and middle grade novels, including co-writing Miss Meteor with Lena Marie over there, which is about extraterrestrials, beauty pageants, small towns, and stardust, not necessarily in that order.
Okay, continuing in what I think is clockwise. Hi, I'm Marie McLemore. My pronouns are they, them, and part of what I love about doing panels with Tehlor is that we get to do like our different descriptions of this book, and I love it every single time. So, most recent book is our co-write Miss Meteor, which I usually think of as our book of Stardust, Selena, and trying to stage the biggest beauty pageant upset in a small town in 50 years.
You are so much better at that than I am every time. Just remember hers. Hers was the best. Theirs was the best.
My name's Aiden Thomas. My pronouns are he, they. I am the author of Cemetery Boys, which is, I like to call it a Latinx ghost story turned rom-com about Yadriel, who summons the ghost of his high school bad boy, Julian Diaz, and they need to figure out how Julian died so that Yadriel can help him pass over to the afterlife. And my favorite book of all time is 1,500 Miles from the Sun by Jonny Garza Villa, which I just got to read. So everyone should be adding that to their list. And there we go, the end.
I knew what clockwise was. I didn't realize we were anchored, like in the same position for all of us. So I was like, how are we going to know? This is going to be chaos. So anyway, hi everyone. I am Oshiro. I'm the author of Anger's the Gift, which is my first YA book. And they recently released Each of Us a Desert, as well as the forthcoming The Insiders, which is my middle grade debut out next year. And my favorite book is also 1,500 Miles from the Sun, and I can't wait for it to crush all of you. I just read it a month ago, and I can't stop talking about it. So that's what this whole panel is devoted to.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Pohl. I am the author of Fate, the last 8, and the first 7. The last 8 comes first, and the first 7 comes last. It's kind of confusing, but it's they're a duology of sci-fi about Latina pilots reviving the end of the world, much like we all are trying this year. So I didn't know I was writing about the future, but this is nice. And the forthcoming A Beautiful Doom, which is about like 4 friends in a boarding school, and there's a lot of like stabbing and mystery, and it's about fairy tales as well. I need to come up with a pitch, and my pronouns are she, her. And I'm very excited to be joining like legendary authors over here.
Love that. Love that we all worked together to figure out what clockwise was. And I love that you're all here. So To start off with just like a cute little icebreaker question, I just wanted to think of like the queerest thing I could think of. And so I was wondering if y'all could describe your books as like a drag persona. Like if they were like a drag king, queen, creature, like what would their aesthetic be like? What would they wear? Like what's their colors? What is their go-to lip sync song? Stuff like that.
Are we still going clockwise?
Yeah, let's just get the clock. I think that's going to be easiest.
Okay, so hilariously, Anna Marie and I were texting about this last night because our book is already called Miss Meteor, which I think is a pretty great drag name. And then like the colors of the cover too, I'm just like, yep, it pretty much goes. Like the question was pretty much answered for us.
Are we doing our dramatic reading?
Do you want to?
I think we should.
Please. Oh my god.
We're gonna reenact the text message.
Conversation from last night. Okay. Who starts? Do I start? I think I do.
Yeah, I think you do.
Okay. Okay, so I just posted first. Our book's drag name is obviously just Miss Meteor, right?
Right, and she's a brown girl wearing a blonde wig and a carnation pink prom dress and a perpetual middle finger to the audience.
Can she please have combat boots with her prom dress?
Obviously, and maybe a Salinas cap.
And that sparkly nebula eye makeup. What's her song? This is my favorite part.
Selena's entire canon, and you're all gonna show respect and sit there and listen to all of it.
And my last note, which is that she sings into a spatula-shaped microphone, which if you've read the book, actually makes sense. So yeah, there we go. That's our drag persona.
That is pretty much our book in drag form.
That's incredible, and like now I'm stressed out. So for Cemetery Boys, it would very obviously the drag persona would be Lady Death, who was a character in my book, and she would be like 6'7" and in a red mantle with gold embroidery, and she would have just the massive amounts of marigolds in her hair and on her person would be absolutely stunning. And I kind of feel like she would be a sister of Perpetual Indulgence. So that really good, the white makeup and the glitter like everywhere. So I think that would be beautiful. And she would really need to, you guys stole my Selena song, so now I'm trying to think of something else. So I feel like her intro music would have to be one of Julian's favorite songs by like Daddy Yankee, like a really awful like reggaeton. That would just be like completely obnoxious. And yeah.
I didn't think, I wanted to, I couldn't think of like a witty, like pun-filled drag queen name or whatever, but I thought that the outfit that Sochil would wear for each of us at Desert, I would love it to be topped with a crown of, I don't know if you've ever seen the flowers that are on the top of a barrel cactus, but they're these extremely bright bursts of color. And when I was doing research for the book, getting to see those in person, where you can see them like a mile away because they're just so bright and colorful. So I would want her entire outfit to be that like dark green of a cactus, but then she's got the flower crown on top. And she would be singing, and this is a deep cut. I don't know if some of you were even alive when this song was created. I would choose the song Missing by Everything But the Girl, which has that wonderful line, like the deserts miss the rain. It's like this old trip hop song from like 1992 or 3, maybe 4, I don't know, but early 90s. It's perfect, exactly the whole like aesthetic of the book.
I feel so uncultured now that I have to go last because like my drag queen culture is 0. You guys have to educate me eventually. I'm very bad at this. But I think that with the whole, like my aesthetic for writing is that I try to have like a mix. So it would have to be a mix of fabrics, and the outfit would have to be a mix between like kind of like dark and bleak, but at the same time there's like, you know, she can take the coat off and then there's like the sunshine beneath it all, so we can always see that there's something beneath it all that can shine and that it makes worthwhile. And I am a very, very basic person. So for lip sync, I would probably go with like a song by Paramore, especially from After Laughter, because I feel like Hard Times is a good one, which is perfect because it has like this upbeat, very great beat, but it's kind of like, if you pay attention to the lyrics, it's a little tiny bit depressing, but it is great as well. So I'm done.
I stand all of those. Oh my god. Like I feel like I'd probably have to just steal from Miss Meteor, and like because my drag queen would completely be a Selena impersonator, like very much like with like that purple thing like happening with the jumpsuit, and she'd probably sing like some really uppity Selena songs like 3 weeks out of 4, but then that 4th week she shows up kind of drunk and is singing "Dreaming of You" like while eating Whataburger on stage. So like I think that's probably yeah. We're gonna move on now, but I love all of those. Okay, so serious questions. One commonality that I saw immediately between all of y'all is that you've all written non-contemporary stories. So like whether speculative, science fiction, fantasy, or magical realism, how does writing the queer experience in a not purely contemporary setting amplify storytelling?
I think for me, it's a really cool way to discuss the sort of feelings of othering and feelings of oppression and feelings of just feeling left out of everything without making it like a deep issue book. Because I think when I was growing up, a lot of the queer stories I read, it was like some somebody always dies or like gets kicked out of their house or like goes to conversion therapy, and like all those are totally valuable stories when they're done by people in the community. But I think for me, I wanted to be able to not overlook those issues but also present them in a way that you could still have joy and magic and all those things. So being able to sort of like externalize a lot of those issues by making them speculative elements really helped to kind of like keep the mood light, keep things feeling magical and fun while not discounting the fact that those are struggles we go through.
So growing up in the community I grew up in, magical realism sort of was my contemporary. Like that kind of was my reference point. I didn't know the term magical realism. So when it started like getting defined for me, I was like, I thought this is just storytelling. Like in my family, this is storytelling, like in my community. So that was sort of my reference point. That was sort of my literary home. And also like I resonate with so much of what Tehlor said. Like it's opening doors and opening stories to us. It's letting us into spaces. And I think that was something that was also important to me with magical realism, because as much as I love my community, I have not always had the best experience being queer and trans in my community. So letting those aspects of my identity and letting all of my communities into that sort of like literary home, that was a way of saying we belong here, like even if we don't always talk about our identities within our families, even if we feel like we can't for whatever reason, like we are still here and we still belong in these spaces.
Yeah, for me, I think that they're specifically why I like writing spec fic or fantasy and queerness is because I feel like queerness is actually a very magical thing. So I kind of equate the two almost automatically, specifically because like when you're first kind of figuring it out, it can be kind of like this secret hidden thing that's like just for you, that like not everybody else knows about yet. And so it's kind of a secret kind of precious magic to have. And then the process of kind of like starting to slowly share that magic with people who you love and trust, I think is a really beautiful thing. And for me, for writing Cemetery Boys, it was important that Yaz's queerness is a magical thing. And while he's kind of going through this whole process, the magic is the first and kind of only reaffirming thing that where he actually feels like, oh, okay, like I am trans, this is my identity, and like that's okay because my Lady Death, who is like the patron of this group of Brewhex, she can see me for who I am even if my community can't. And yeah, so I there's just something just naturally magical about queerness, I think, And that's how I just kind of, that's how it like manifests in my writing.
Yeah, and I love that we're talking about it as a community thing too, because I can't not think of it that way as well. Particularly, you know, when I was first coming out as gay or queer, most of the people I interacted with were Latinx because I grew up in Southern California. And then I think about as well how I use storytelling to talk about that sort of transitional state. You know, with Each of Us a Desert, I was writing that book when I was first coming out in my private life as non-binary. And so it's not a mistake that if you read the book, it feels like a giant metaphor for queerness. It feels like a giant metaphor for escaping from the gender binary, particularly because it's about a girl who is presented with a binary. You do this one thing, and if you don't do it, horrible, terrible things happen to everyone in her whole life. And as she gets out in the world, she learns there are a million different ways to do this. There aren't one. There is no binary. It's not one or the other. And so I think what's great about speculative fiction, you know, I come from the tradition. You know, I think about like how writers like Isabel Allende or like Octavia Butler, how much they have affected what I see as the means that you can tell a story using speculative fiction. So I don't, you know, I tend not, the spec fic stuff I write is not, it doesn't tend to be escapist. I think I would like to write that one day, but it really is my way to be in conversation with the world, but to take that conversation into this fantastical realm, either invented or doing contemporary spec fic stuff like, because it's my way to grapple with what's going on and the things that I've been through as a queer person, as a non-binary person. And it's been really cool, especially, I mean, I don't know if any of you have gotten this too, but like, it's great when you put all of this queerness into your work and then it goes out into the world. And then you have these kids it was kids who noticed, like it was kids in school visits who noticed the metaphor for queerness in the book. It wasn't adults, it wasn't reviewers. It was kids, and it was just like the coolest, most validating thing because I was like, yes, I am writing this like in service of you and in conversation with you. So I don't know. I think I'll always write something in the spec fic realm because it feels magical. Aiden, I agree. We're so magical. I love it.
Yeah, no, I think this is about what you said about community and like the way you interact with the world. And it has always been like with my own family, not just the stories, but you know, my mother was a big friend girl. Like she loved Star Wars. So I grew up listening to her talk about Star Wars. Like I cannot remember a time when I wasn't a big fan of Star Wars as well. Like I was, I don't know, 2 years old and I was already a fan. I had like no idea what was going on, but that's fine. And I think that for me, it has always been about trying to like insert yourself and give a piece of yourself back to the kids who can be reflected in those medias, because like as a community we aren't that much. Like every single space like that is the worldwide media, it's mostly like it's very white, it's very cis, it's very like heteronormative. Like you never get a chance to tell your own story, but when we do, we can make it great. And it's always about like paying forward in a way as well, because I didn't get to see myself in those stories when I was reading them. I love them, but they didn't reflect the same struggles that I was going through like as a queer kid. And especially because in a way, for me, it was always like I realized I was aromantic before I was bisexual, because that thing like that, like emptiness and denial was like made more sense for me. And that was not a thing that was spoken about in any media that I loved. But there was some media, especially with fantasy and with sci-fi, and you had those for me, for I know that this is kind of like that it's not great representation. But to be honest, I kind of really always loved robots who did not like love anybody, because I was like, oh, hey, this is like me. And it was always fun for me. And at the same time, like you have to give yourself voice to explore the same thoughts and with more depth than you can ever, like, you know, someone who is not aromantic writing a robot who has no feelings will be very different from someone who's like trying to explore what that's like, having not having romantic feelings for anybody through that lens. It's very different. So I think that we can make the sci-fi and speculative scenario very different just by exploring our own identities. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a focus, as Tehlor said. Like, it doesn't have to be, oh, this is a very issue book. It can be just a part of the story and a part of the theme, and you can move forward while, you know, also having like explosions and sword fights and all the other kind of fun stuff that we get to see on TV, but not really for queer kids yet.
There it goes. I love all those answers, especially like as a huge fan of just like anything speculative, like here for it, especially when it's queer and Latinx, like, oh my God, feed it to me. So like I'm living. I want to ask, and like one thing I really appreciate about this panel is that like the diversity between like not just like sexualities, but also like genders and like romantic inclinations or lack thereof. Like we have like the variety of queer spectrums on this panel. And I really appreciate that. And like I wanted to ask, like as queer Latinas who are just living on the intersections of multiple identities, how does your own lived experience within any of those queer spectrums affect the way you tell stories? And also like, was writing queer characters always something you planned on doing? Or was it kind of like this internal process of deciding I can, and so I will?
Yeah, I think the question of intersection is always really interesting to me because I was out and queer in a small town from a really young age. So I dealt with a lot of like the weird pressures of that. And a lot of my town is this kind of like really faux liberal, white, tolerant place. So it was more like being a curiosity. Everybody wanted to ask you like a question about it or like prove that they were super open-minded by saying you were friends with them even if you weren't, and like that kind of stuff. So it wasn't like as violent, but then on the other hand, I obviously look like this, so I'm not walking around getting discriminated against based on skin color or anything like that. I also am mixed race. I have a white parent, and so it, for me, writing intersectional stories is a lot about having privilege in one area and not as much in another, and how you navigate that. And I think with Miss Meteor and writing about Chicky, I got as close as I've ever gotten to my personal experience, which is like Chicky's family is pretty privileged race-wise in the town where they live. Like people are like, you know, oh, they're the good immigrants, and a lot of them pass for white or are lighter skinned. But Chicky is one of the very few, if one of the very few queer kids in her town, and is petrified of people finding out about that. So she has a lot of fear around being identified in a certain way in terms of queerness, but not so much in terms of being Latinx. So I feel like a lot of the line I try to walk with my stories is not talking too much about skin color based oppression because I don't experience that, but also discussing the fact that there is an intersection there. Like you're still, you know, you're still within this certain cultural subgroup. You're dealing with your family, you're dealing with your friends, but also to show how maybe you might have more privilege to wield than other people in one area and how to like do that responsibly. So that's definitely something I consider a lot, and especially in this book.
So a process I had to go through was sort of letting myself into, and my identities and my communities into my books in pieces, because when I first my debut was pretty straight, very brown. It was a romance between two brown kids, and I thought I had gotten away with something by getting to write about my community, by getting to write a Latinx family. And because I felt like I'd gotten away with something, I felt like I had to pull it back. So it took me a while to realize, and luckily I got there by the time I wrote my second book. I'm very grateful. I had supportive people around me being like, no, write the book that you want to write. But so letting in queer identity, letting in trans identity, and eventually letting in non-binary identity, that was something that sort of had to come in steps for me, which is kind of funny because I wrote I wrote like 4 books with trans and non-binary characters before realizing I'm trans and non-binary, and had somehow just managed to like ignore the fact that I like lived as a guy for 2 years in high school. I just like, trauma is amazing. Like it's horrible, but what your brain does with it to protect you is kind of amazing. So even though that stuff is hard, like your brain is smart. Like your brain sometimes wants to do things to help you and be like, you'll find this when you're ready. So when I look back on those books, I think it's kind of amazing that I didn't see it. It's kind of amazing the level of denial I was in, but I also try to give myself grace for that, to try to model hopefully the same kind of grace I want everyone to give themselves about identity. That we're all kind of works in progress with identity, and that is okay. It is more than okay. It is beautiful. Like we change, we embrace different things, and we find each other, and we love each other, and we affirm each other.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I always I was like, why do I have to go after AM? Because they always say these really like beautiful, magnificent things. So thanks a lot.
I got my revenge. I've had to go after you on a lot of panels. I felt the same way.
For me, my publishing journey is a little interesting, and this isn't something that a lot of folks know. I try to talk about it more, but it just kind of, other things are more interesting. But Cemetery Boys was not the first book that I sold. The first book that I sold was Lost in the Neverwoods, which is coming out in March, which I'm very excited about. But that is a white book that doesn't discuss sexuality. And when it was time to talk about option books, I had to work up the courage to go to my editor, and I was like, here's a bunch of ideas. Cemetery Boys was the very last one. It was like a paragraph long, and it was mostly question marks, because I was like maybe he's trans, and like maybe he's also gay. And it was, and like Latinx too, while I'm at it, and like a whole magic system built around Latinx culture. Like maybe that's a thing that I could write. And what it was, I realized later, was me asking permission to write about my intersectionalities, because I thought that I wasn't welcome or allowed, or like a story about a character like me was even marketable, or that anyone was interested in it. And the only reason that I got the bravery to pitch Cemetery Boys to begin with is because of Zoraida Cordova and Labyrinth Lost in the Brooklyn Brew House series. That was the first time I ever saw someone who had multiple parts of my identity in a book, and in a book where it was also fantasy, where it wasn't about the main character suffering around their queerness, and where like the whole magic system was again built on this really beautiful Latinx spirituality. And it was absolutely life-changing. And yeah, it's been a wild and really exciting ride. Lost in the Neverwoods is still very much a book of my heart and my soul. But Cemetery Boys was the first time I was able to be myself, and through that process, I was able to come out more publicly and kind of share who I am as a person. And yeah, I got top surgery while I was editing Cemetery Boys, and all of the authors in my imprint, along with my editorial team, sent me a huge gift box for surgery and after surgery, with like blankets and like little activities to read. And they got me like a back scratcher, and I was like, what am I going to use this for? And like the day after, I was like, oh, it's because you get super itchy when you're like off anesthesia, and that, like without that back scratcher, I would not have made it through recovery. So it's been a strange and not a linear journey, and I'm so thankful to like have this opportunity to be who I am now.
It's so weird how so many of us made it in too, because I wrote my first book when I was still in college and tried to get it published, and all I heard, and this was in like 2004, 2005, was that this book, it wasn't believable that the main character could be gay and Mexican at the same time, I was just like, okay, I guess what? But that was like the landscaping of publishing 15 years ago, which I'm very happy, because that is eventually going to become a middle grade book. I'm very excited. Keep the things that you wrote a long time ago, everyone. But I was lucky enough to land with a team at Tortine who have been super supportive of me being as personal and autobiographical as I am in both of my books. And I got to write complicated identities. I get to write complicated experiences, and I know not everyone gets to do that. So I do feel very lucky. I also know that it is a challenge for all of us, because we are writing in an industry that is largely white, that is largely straight, that is largely cis. And what I mean by the industry is it's not just people at the publishing house, but people at the the magazines and the journals and the outlets that are covering us. It's the people who are reading our books, and I think that's a part of it that's been harder to contend with. I feel lucky that I have the support that I do, but it's not always easy writing brown queer people in an industry and in a community where we're still outliers to a lot of people. I know that, for example, with Anger is a Gift, there were a lot of people who were angry that none of the main characters or secondary characters or tertiary characters were white. And they were like, it's not, how do I see myself in this? It's too much of a challenge, which I was like, welcome to our lives. So have fun, because this is what we've been dealing with our entire lives. But contending with that notion that many of us are not centering whiteness. We're not centering, cis people. We're not centering straight people in our narratives. And it makes people deeply uncomfortable. And they unfortunately take it out on us. But at the same time, I wouldn't do it any different. I wouldn't. This is the stories I want to tell. This is who I am,
Yeah, I think everyone said it so much, but I think for me, my journey was a little bit different, especially because English is not my first language. It is my second, and I learned it when I was a teenager. And for me, it was kind of harder to try and break it into the industry because I knew I had to be better than native people writing in their own language. So I was also extremely conscious because I was like, this is gonna be a reason why agents and editors and people will reject me because I live in another country. I have another experience. This is gonna make life harder for me. So I can't make it even harder for them. I can't give them another reason to reject me for some reason, whatever it is, so that it doesn't become it doesn't pile up, so I don't become a thing to be worried about. And that was when I started writing in English. That was one of the things that really worried me. And so my first manuscript was very cis, it was very white, it was set in medieval Russia, which I love medieval Russia, so that's my interest. But at the same time, I was trying to find a way to which I could fit into the current narrative, with YA and everything else going on. And for me, it was Last 8 it's still not a book that I center myself entirely because Clover is Mexican American and her grandparents were immigrants. My family is not has not immigrated. My family has lived in Brazil my whole life. I had the experience of living in Australia for a year and then I came back, and so it was very, very different from my own identity. But at the same time, it was trying to open little by little a bit of space to write about myself. And although I'm centering she is Mexican American and brown and I'm Brazilian and also white, but her own aromanticism is what kind of compelled the narrative. I was like, how do you survive the end of the world when most apocalyptic stories center this, oh, the last couple on earth, how are they gonna survive? I have to think about my boyfriend and how he survives. I was like, no, screw that, I'm not writing about this. I want to write about a girl who's oh, screw the others. I'm just I have to live through this for myself with my dog, and that's what I care about. So that was really important for me. And it was still obviously, as Anne Marie said, it is always a process, and it becomes little by little you can explore different identities and how it can all affect everything else. It's a little by little, and you can kind of twinkle around with everything, with your identity. And one of the things that I learned is that I don't I'm not too much and I can be whatever I want. So if agents and editors think that this is a reason to reject me, then you know what? I don't want them either. So that's fine. And I think it is important that we can center ourselves in this way, that we can tell our own stories and try to build ourselves and build our own narratives without having to worry too much. And just you're opening doors and you're letting other people come through as well. So, I write a little bit, and then the next person is going to come out like next year, and it's going to be like an even greater sci-fi apocalypse between like maybe with another romantic lead. You don't have to be the only one, and we're all like trying to build something better here.
Well, y'all left me just fully inspired and emotional. With that being said, we're going to move into some student questions that we got submitted. Here's the first one.
My name is Lila, and I have 2 questions for you. My first question is, what did you want to be in the future when you were a child? My second question is, if you wanted to be an author, what is the difference from your expectations as a child and from your current career?
Okay, so I have just like a couple of people.
No, it's already crushed me. I can do this real quick, which is I actually wanted to be an author when I was a kid. I wanted a book with my name on the cover. I didn't expect that I would have to answer so many emails and that I would lose sense of what time was. I don't know what time is anymore. I don't know what day. I don't know what days are anymore. I've been perpetually on deadline for like, I can't. That's a moment. That's a period of time. I have to think of what it is. I don't know. That's what I didn't expect. It's a lot of work.
I wanted to be a marine biologist. Never dreamed of being an author. Turns out I suck at science, so I had to pick a new dream.
Okay.
When I was little, we had to do like, never mind.
Okay, next question from another student. Oh, that's a good name.
Hi, my name is Johnny. My question is, what inspired you to write a book? Is it sort of just like a hobby thing, or is it like, do you have a deeper purpose? Is there a goal you're trying to accomplish?
I think this is a pretty good answer. So if anyone feels like answering this, like I would say go ahead, because that's a
I'm going to answer that. I picked everything like that I love, and I was just like, I would like this, but make it gay. So like the last 8 is kind of like Independence Day, but Independence gay. So that's how things start. And for me, it's kind of like, I'm just going to pick this one. Like, the next book I'm working on is kind of like a YA, What We Do in the Shadows. And then I was like, oh, I like this. I'm going to like steal it for myself. And it doesn't have to be that deep, like sometimes I find the theme halfway through and then I'm like, oh, I'm going to write about this. And this one is going to be about family, or this one is going to be like about connecting to other people in friendship, or other kind of stuff, love and everything else. But, most of my ideas are kind of like, I watch a movie and I'm like, this is so good. I want to write something like it. I must steal it. And that's it.
I'm just trying to make people cry. That's basically my whole thing. like sad cry, angry cry, curse my name cry, any kind of crying. That's what I'm going for always.
I want to say something. Okay, so like I would say my own inspiration, like I write for like everything that I was scared to be whenever I was like 17, 18 years old. Like I grew up in a very small white town in Texas, and like I just tried to assemble myself in a way that was most consumable to like very like right-leaning Catholic white people in my Catholic high school. And like I decided that like I want to celebrate everything that makes me happy now, like my queerness and my Latinxness. Like I want to write that and be bold for that, and be bold for all the teenagers that like maybe were in my same shoes and are looking for some sort of fearlessness, and to know that they can just embrace everything that they are. Okay, next question. Okay. How do you generate new ideas for your books and put them into writing the way you think of them in your brain? From Lily in Maine.
I'm just gonna listen to everyone else's answer because I still can't do this. Like I can't put it on in writing the same way I hear it in my brain. I always feel like my books are so good in my brain, and then I try to write them down and it's like, what is any of this?
So as someone who was a nano coach this year, I can tell you that that's not going to happen. The beautiful picture that you have in your brain is never going to end up on the page, especially not during a first draft. And I feel like that's where writers kind of get lost in the weeds, because they're like, this isn't as beautiful as I have it in my head. And like, what's the point? I'm not going to finish this or whatever. And the whole point of writing is that it's in revisions that things get beautiful. And in terms of generating new ideas, I like consuming ideas. Consuming media helps me spark new ideas. especially if I'm thinking with like a fan fiction brain where I'm like, oh, I really like this show, but what would happen with this AU? And then that gets to be turned into its own book. So that's my favorite thing to do. And I just write, I have like brain dump docs where I just throw down ideas and then I'll go back, poke at them and see what actually is like novel length.
So the consensus seems to be just like dump and see what happens. That's good information. So yeah, I think that is it for us and our time here. I'm super happy to have spent this time with all of y'all. Like, oh my God. I am going to just like freak out off camera after this ends. And then after that, who knows? We'll watch more. We'll watch more of the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. Hope that y'all have been enjoying the festival so far and all the panels, all of the great authors and illustrators that have joined us this weekend. And I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend. So thank you for attending the Colores panel. And yeah.
And thank you for moderating, Jonny.
That's amazing.
Thank you, Jonny.
It was great. Thank you.
Alex, you're muted.
You're muted, Alex.
And I was very clever. You missed it. I was just saying Queer Heart grew like 3 sizes. That panel was incredible. Thank you so much. Just want to quickly say that we're going to play a really cool video that Macmillan has given us. It's even more wonderful things about Aiden Thomas. So if you just bear with me while I share my screen. This is going to be very tech. And thank you all again for being here and for just being the rainbows. Thank you.
What's up, everybody? My name's Aiden Thomas, and I am the author of Cemetery Boys, a book that I like to call a Latinx ghost story turned rom-com. It's about Yadriel, a trans boy who is trying to prove to his family and Bruex community that he's a real Brujo. Yadriel decides that the best way to prove himself is to summon the spirit of his recently deceased cousin. However, things go very wrong when he instead accidentally summons Julian Diaz, the resident bad boy of his high school. Now, Yadriel and Julian are stuck together until they find out what happened to Julian, and he lets Yadriel release his spirit to the afterlife. So the main inspiration for Cemetery Boys for me is kind of a funny story. I was scrolling through Tumblr one day, and I follow a lot of writing prompt blogs, and I saw a post, and it was just 1 sentence long, and it said, "What would you do if you summoned a ghost and then you couldn't get rid of it?" And it's funny because a lot of people were replying or reblogging and talking about these really like creepy ideas and scary stories. But the first reaction that I had when I read it was like, ghost that I couldn't get rid of, and what if it was really cute? So that was kind of the basis for the whole story. And then I really wanted to write a ghost story that centered around Dia de Muertos. And so the two just kind of immediately aligned, and the plot just kind of exploded from there. It's hard to come up with an answer for which character in Cemetery Boys I relate to the most, because I feel like I relate to all of them, but in like very different ways. But for the main characters, I feel like everyone assumes, because Yadriel and I have so much in common, like on paper, they're like, oh, that's like the self-insert character. But I'm actually much more of a Julian. His like kind of chaotic energy and like impulsiveness and kind of just general goofy personality is just so me that I actually feel like I really connect to him as a character out of all of them in the entire book. I think that my favorite scene to write in Cemetery Boys was chapter 3. It's the scene that I like do the most live readings of, and it's when Yadriel first summons Julian, and so it's Yadriel, Julian, and Maritza finally like meeting each other for the first time, and it was so much fun to write because it's you really get like a crash course in all 3 of their personalities, and it's kind of like, it's not like a smooth introduction. Like there's a lot of problems that pop up, and I thought that that was really like a really fun thing for me to write. and explore their personalities for the first time together. I think that the hardest scene to write would probably be the ending. I find that writing the endings to books are the most difficult part of the process because you really want to make sure that you tie up all your loose ends together in a way that's maybe not pretty but satisfying for the reader. And I think like the worst thing is to read a book that you really love but that has like a really unsatisfying ending. So I always really stress out about like doing an ending that is really gratifying. It was seriously cathartic to be able to write about Latinx culture while I was writing Cemetery Boys. Just like from the magic system to the personal dynamics and even the mythos, everything is Latinx. And like everything is so nuanced and vibrant, and I really wanted to celebrate that and to also kind of expose readers who aren't familiar with different Latinx traditions to like what our magic looks like both the literal and the metaphorical. And, you know, from like marigolds to the food, it was really just a pure joy to have the power to share these things with other people and to really just unapologetically show off the culture. And it's so difficult, especially in fantasy, to really find stories that center a Latinx character that it felt really special and so rewarding to finally like put out there and to have readers read. Honestly, I just want more Latinx representation in all genres of literature. Like, it's so important to have that representation when it comes to like rom-coms or contemporary, or my favorite, obviously, fantasy and thrillers. Like, really, I just want us everywhere. And I want all of our different stories to have a chance to be told, because the Latinx culture is not a monolith. It's varied and it's very diverse, and I want all of those voices to be represented. I really just want to consume everything, especially queer stories, especially trans stories. I want all of it. Gosh, I think the biggest piece of advice that I would give my younger self would be to just write your story. For the longest time, I didn't think that there was a place for someone like me in publishing. I didn't think that I would be marketable, and I never saw myself represented in media, so that told me that I didn't belong there. So just kind of the knowledge that writing a personal story about myself, about my Latinx identity, about my queer identity and my trans identity would really have such a huge impact on readers, and that it's important to get those stories out and for readers to read those stories so that they can see themselves reflected in media is so important, and to just like get that bravery to do it. As far as for aspiring authors, the best advice I can give is to tell your story and to, everyone hates this advice, but to finish your first draft. I feel like when I try to give it writing advice, it's usually on like revisions and stuff like that, and people are like, oh yeah, well I haven't finished writing my book yet. And like, you can't make a book and you can't publish a book until you have that first draft. So I know it's hard, and for me it's the worst part of the process is that rough draft, but you just have to power through it, because it's revisions and editing, really, that's what makes a book come alive. The first draft is not going to be good, and that's okay. You just need to get words down that you can then make it better. I really hope that readers will find connection and feel seen after reading Cemetery Boys. I really wanted to create a story where readers could connect with Yadriel on universal truths that are kind of basic to the human experience. Things like struggling to fit in, feeling accepted for who you are, and feeling loved. A lot of queer teens experience their first sense of belonging or affirmation with people like queer bloggers or YouTubers, TikTokers, and of course characters in books like Yadriel. And like, even if they can't talk to them personally, seeing people with their identities and seeing themselves being reflected in books, or just having internet stars telling them that they're valid, really gives a sense of community and comfort, which is something that they often don't receive from the like people in their lives who they can maybe tangibly touch. And sometimes it's a sense of closeness and connection to people has nothing to do with proximity. And I'm really hoping that readers feel that closeness and feel accepted and loved when they read Cemetery Boys, and that closeness with Yadriel.